Some of my most profound moments have been just extremely messy and chaotic. So it's not just like you can find this joy and this bliss within the chaos. It really is available to you. And sometimes I feel like it's actually more available to you in those moments.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Inventor and author of Primal Habits, Uninflamed, Master of You, and Body Thrive, and soon to be released, The Witch's Cancer Journal.
A weaver of words and ancient worlds into the future.
Plumbing for depth in the playground of your continual reinvention.
A wisdom rich, Agayana Yohini.
And now the moment we've been waiting for is here.
Ringleader of Club Thrive and Wellness Pro Academy.
A freedom warrior, earth mother, proud mama, devoted wife.
Not your grandmother's Ayurveda.
Futurist. Biohacker. Guru and Goofball.
Where truth and freedom prevail.
Evolving the ancient into the future.
Welcome to the Thrive with Cate Stillman podcast. Made for you by us.
Hello, everyone. It's Cate Stillman with the Thrive with Cate podcast, and I'm stoked to be back with my good friend, Brett Larkin, upliftedyoga.com. Many of you know her because you may be one of her over 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. And she also has a podcast that I've had the pleasure of being on. And we're going to get into her brand spanking new book, Yoga Life, Habits, Poses. Oh, there it is. And breathwork to channel joy amidst the chaos. And the
amidst,
chaos,
it's a hard word I've been finding as we talk about the book with more and more people. Amidst the chaos. Yes.
So yes, we're in the middle of chaos. Seems like, the world is increasingly more VUCA, more volatile and uncertain and chaotic and ambiguous. And so given that that's a given, we have the choice to channel joy is what I'm getting from your title. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's just start with the title about like how you came to that. I mean, you're a mom, you've got 2 kids. In the book, you talk through your low point of like losing your dad and having babies at the same time. And I think that's just the nature of life, right? Like the nature of life is war and death to a certain degree. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about this in your personal experience.
Yeah, well, it was really heightened for me, Cate, because I basically gave birth and became a mom and then lost my father in the same 12-month period, which was a very intense experience, especially because I was my father's sole care provider, really his sole care provider. He lived with me and my husband. I'm an only child. My parents were divorced. He didn't remarry. So it was me and him on this journey together. So it was very intimate in terms of really being in charge of his care and in charge of a newborn. And of course, that was the year my business was also doing some really wild things and growing in a great way. But it definitely felt like I was drowning and everything was happening at once. And I think often we feel like that in life. It's like everything is happening at once. And what I call this rock bottom year, obviously it was wonderful to become a mother, but everything about how I lived my life and how I practiced yoga was forced to change. Nothing stayed the same. I mean, when you have a kid, as a lot of people listening know, your self-care, especially at the beginning, kind of goes out the window. You are the new living placenta, like feeding and helping this child like launch. So I was extremely depleted, extremely overwhelmed. And I found that the yoga that I had been practicing up to that point wasn't serving or helping me anymore. And I mean that in a twofold way. One, I couldn't do 60 or 90-minute classes anymore at a studio or on my own, which is what I had always been cheerleading people to do, make that daily practice happen, get to the mat. I also was finding the yoga philosophy that I had been so interested in wasn't helping me either, because in these days, bedpans and diapers and calling my father's insurance company, I didn't need samadhi. I needed a life raft. I needed a way to survive to the end of the day. And I began really realizing and digging into some of these texts and finding that they weren't actually written for people who are what would call like householders, like people who are taking action in the world. Most of the yoga philosophy we're interested in the West, we're really focused on the Yoga Sutras, even though there's so many other great texts, other texts that I'd argue are better suited to people who are living an active life with families and jobs. But for whatever reason, we're really focused on the Yoga Sutras. And the Yoga Sutras were designed for people who had nothing to do except to try to achieve enlightenment, essentially. And I found that that wasn't what I needed, and it wasn't helpful in that particular phase.
Yeah, amen to that. And this is something I have heard again and again and again and again from my, because when you grow up as an adult in yoga, like you and me and most of my friends, there's these lived reality truths that become self-apparent, where it's like, wait a second, something's off here. And so I keep hearing this from people from a variety of different yoga traditions, all female, just being like, actually, we got the wrong memo. We got the monk path, right? We got the path of the aesthetic path and not the path of the householder.
Yeah, so let's dig into that. I mean, I would say there's a twofold problem there, right? First of all, zooming out. Yoga, and I think you'll approve of this message, was always meant to be practiced in the context of its sister science, Ayurveda. So that is one of the key principles that I talk about at the top of the book. And I think you and probably everyone listening would agree with me. I know your audience, Cate, is probably pretty familiar with what Ayurveda is, but if anyone isn't, it's basically translated as life sciences. It's a galaxy of holistic therapies that originated in India. It really focuses on the individual and then says, okay, if you have a certain elemental makeup, this food makes sense for you. This type of weather is more beneficial for you. And these types of poses are going to affect you differently than other ones, right? This is common sense. This is why we hear so many people saying, or I have people messaging me on the internet, off YouTube and social saying, oh, I love Breath of Fire. I love this breathing technique. While someone else is saying, this gives me a migraine. I hate this, right? And it's like, so how do we reconcile these things? It's like, well, because we're all different. So these breathing techniques are going to affect us differently. When I did a lot of the research for the book, what I found is that yoga was actually always meant, if we look at the Mysore style of yoga, it was always meant to be transmitted from teacher to student, with the teacher giving a student more poses as they were ready. No one was ever supposed to be doing the same poses at the same time, on the same cadence, on the same breath. That really happened when yoga migrated west, got divorced from Ayurveda, and got blended with the group fitness movement that was happening in the 70s and 80s, kind of the Jane Fonda era. And that definitely made it easier for mass transmission. So I think we have a twofold problem. We have a problem in the sense that we're practicing poses without taking into account that these poses are energy medicine for our body. And just like different medications affect people differently and have different side effects, so do these poses and breath work. So that's a problem. The other problem is just like our overall approach, as you said, is, back in the ancient times, the people who would be doing what's outlined in the Yoga Sutras were the equivalent of young priest boys. So like young men who are going into a religious scholarly life. They had nothing to do. They're essentially a monk other than practice these 8 limbs, do religious rites, conduct rituals. And then on the very other side of the spectrum, very elderly men. So once you were a grandfather in your town or village, you would then, turn into a beggar, essentially, go wander in the woods, beg for alms, and start practicing yoga as a way to train yourself to get ready to leave your physical body, because they believed in reincarnation. So for those two groups of people, a lot of what's outlined in the Yoga Sutras makes sense, because yoga at this point was about transcending the body, right? It wasn't about being good for the body. That's a very new concept. And I can go into a little bit the history of when that huge shift happened, because it was like a major pivot. But up until the Industrial Revolution, yoga was primarily seen as a spiritual practice. And it was kind of about overcoming the body. The body had all these pesky urges. It wants sex. It wants food. It wants fidget, right? And so the focus for these priest boys and the elderly was really about like, how do we tame the body? And this is where we see some of these depictions of yogis starving themselves, mortification of the flesh, sitting on needles, all of these things.
Why do you think it's mostly women who are now driving the resurgence of yoga in the West?
Such a great question, right? Because when we look at the history, it is so predominantly male. And,
and a lot of the current world's biggest teachers are male. Like it's,
Still true. Yes. My guess, I love, no one's asked me this before. I love, if I were to pose a hypothesis, I think that when yoga got enmeshed with the Jane Fonda era group fitness movement, that's when women were into it because women were told we need to work out. We were told we need to be thin. We're told, right? So I feel like women are more likely to go to like a group type fitness class than potentially men. So I think that could have something to do with it. I think on a bigger level now, like women are leading the charge. And that's why I wanted to write this book, because the book is essentially a giant permission slip to throw away a lot of what we've been taught about yoga and create a personalized practice that is modular and that titrates or that changes with you day to day. So what I want to do is really give everyone a framework so you can say, all right, I know my own energy, my Ayurvedic blueprint, which again, a lot of your family here is probably familiar with. I'm going to take that into account because the thing is, your dominant dosha is probably driving a lot of your decisions. Like I'm Pitta dominant. So when I first came to yoga, guess what I wanted to do? Hot yoga, right? Because like attracts like. That's just the natural order of things. And you know that word dosha means like fault line, that which can easily skew out of balance. And that's because whatever that primary element is within us tends to drive our decision making, and like attracts like. So I always tell people like the style of yoga you're attracted to initially is probably not the one you actually need. You like it because it's familiar. I, as a Pitta dominant person, liked Bikram yoga because it felt familiar for me to push myself in that way, but it was not what I needed to come back into balance. So I'm trying to help people understand you have an elemental blueprint. We don't need to overcomplicate this. It's very simplified in the book, Cate, just FYI. Like I try to do Ayurveda like a nod while keeping it really high level for people. And then how can I pick postures that really help me optimize my time? That's what I call the soulmate postures, right? The ones that usher you into a flow state, link you to your deepest breath, the fastest and most efficiently, because most people don't have a lot of time to practice. And then how do I know what to practice and what not to based on what I have going on today, right? So even if I'm Pitta dominant, if I have to go speak on stage in a couple hours, their breath work that I might usually avoid could make sense for me, right? So we look at every day as like an equation of like how much I've slept, the political, state of the world, what's going on with my kids, how much time I have, how my body's feeling, all of these different things. We can then, just taking a couple data points, really kind of spit out or create a personalized practice that makes sense. Because what I see happen is people have an ideal practice, and if they can't make it to do that, they skip. They just skip it. And so a huge term I use in this book is yogic adaptability. That's, to me, the definition of an advanced practice, yogic adaptability. How good are you, like an apothecarian behind a mixology bar, to mix up or whip up the yoga antidote for whatever you're going through, whether you're feeling grief, whether you have 50 minutes to practice or 5. And so how we do it in the book is I help you create a 20-minute ritual, because I feel like 20 minutes is like achievable for most people. But at the last chapter of the book, we talk about how it's completely modular. So it's like you could skip 4 sections and just do 1 section. Here's how you'd make it 5 minutes. Here's how you'd make it 10 minutes. Here's how, oh, wow, like the house is clean and, I have all my kids out of the house. Like, here's how I'd make it 2 hours, right? So there is breathing room. Like, it's making me think of that spanda word that you love so much, but just like, so that this practice can pulsate with us as we move through life, which is, coming back to your original question, very much something that women need, because we are changing every day of the month. We are changing all the time. So there is a beauty in a yoga practice that is rigid and regimented and serves as a mirror for you. I loved teaching and experiencing 40-day kriyas and things like that as well. But it's like, we've already done that. We've mastered that. There's thousands of books about that already that are teaching you a method or a style and rules. So I kind of wanted to break all of that apart.
So what do you find with the people that are, maybe just starting in yoga and they're like trying to find that, like, how much should I be going to class? And then, should I have a home practice, or like, when do I know enough? Or that sense of maybe the people that only go to class and don't really have a home practice. Do you want to speak to that?
I think going to class is great. I would encourage everyone to have a home practice. I'm going to say that obviously because I'm biased, but there's going to be days where you can't make it to class. If you have a home practice, I think a lot of people, of course, you can follow along to a video, right? And then you can do what I do a lot, which is follow along to a video and then go off script, I call it. So it's like I start following along to a video to just kind of get me going, and then I end up doing my own thing. But what I found to be so powerful and want to share with listeners is that when you're following along, your energy is still going up and out because you're looking, you're following along, you're intellectually trying to put your foot in the right place and do what the teacher is saying. Your mind is still so active, and the postures themselves, the alphabet of asana and needing to move between them, in many ways serves as a distraction. When you are able to tune all of that out, and I'm a little crazy, I practice with a blindfold on. So I like really tune everything out because I find I get so much more bang for my buck if I do this type of practice, right? Like I could follow along to something for 60 or 90 minutes, thinking really intellectually about the poses, following along. My intellectual linear mind is still active. I can feel more relaxed in 20 minutes of being blindfold and doing my soulmate postures and my own personal ritual because you just drop down so much deeper. And I think we each have this primitive, natural healing zone that if we can slow our breathing down enough and trust our body enough, it kind of naturally rises to the surface. And so much repair can happen there. So a lot of what the framework I'm teaching in the book is like how you can usher yourself into that flow state by picking the right postures for your personality, the key breath techniques that you know are really soothing for you. And then it's kind of just like getting more for your yoga buck in 20 minutes instead of 60. And I think a lot of people think, oh, that's intimidating. I wouldn't know what to do. Well, that's what the book's for, because each chapter designs part of your sequence. And if you read the chapter and you're still not sure, the end of every chapter has like a little quiz. I modeled these after the quizzes I used to do at summer camp when I was a little girl in like 17 magazine. And I don't know if anyone remembers like all those little silly quizzes, but it's literally just a quiz like that. Do you remember those where it's like, what was it even about? It's like, I don't know, but they were so fun. They were so fun. So the quizzes are really fun. So if you just do the quiz at the end of each chapter, if you're not sure, it's going to allow you to fill out this little personalized practice worksheet and guide you in the right direction.
Yeah, let's just talk a little bit about like the importance of reading books that inspire us to shape our next day, like shape our next practice or shape what we're really inspired to take action on. Because I'm guessing like a lot of people listening like do read quite a bit of spiritually based books, and then a certain percentage probably don't, you know, that it's more of like, okay, I go to class or I do these things that are more in this like public setting, but I don't really bring that into more my cognitive life.
I think bringing the books in, and I think there's a really key distinction here that you're outlining, which is like, we have a tendency, and I think you're going to cheerlead me on this, but we have a tendency to like outsource our health, outsource our decision-making, outsource our power, right? To a doctor or a yoga teacher or the fitness instructor or that, right? Like that's just what we've been taught is the right thing to do. And reading books and educating yourself in this way beyond the group classes. I mean, I'm not saying group classes are bad. I mean, these are fantastic opportunities to connect with other people, create community. I'm all for that. But I know there was years of my life where that wasn't a possibility. So if you read books and you read all of Cate's books, everyone, I'm sure they already have because I love your books, but any book that's really challenging you to educate yourself about how your body works, how your nervous system works, how you can create and find tools that are personal and relevant and work for you. It's a really powerful way to take ownership back to yourself, to your own health. I call it becoming like a body detective because we're so quick to just like give our power away and just be like, what's the prescription, right? Or like, what's the diet? When really, this is what's so beautiful about Ayurveda, because the underlying texture of Ayurveda is stating that we are all individual. It really means that like we must rise to the call and figure out ourselves and how we interact with this beautiful natural world around us. We can't abdicate responsibility anymore. We can't hide and run away. So that's where I think reading and educating yourself is just so important.
Yeah. I mean, in that level of svadhyaya, of sva, self-dhya, to know like it is self-study. It can't really happen in a public sphere, like, or even in a way, even with like doing an online video, like at some point you do have to put the blindfold on, turn the audio down, turn the ears inside, turn the eyes inside, you know, turn the sensory experience internally to see what yoga is really about. I think the other component of reading or listening to a teaching or whatnot is you're tuning into the frequency of the author. So you're tuning into the frequency of someone who's, potentially devoted their life to a certain study, and that energy, frequency, vibration that they're at, you can get a contact high, you can get a hit off, and then have an open door to another experience. Right. This whole process of transmission, like yoga is, the whole experience of diksha or initiation historically is like that one can transmit a higher state and stage level experience. And someone who wants to receive that can really want that. Like to simply want, in the idea of like wanting to, like, I love that, like channeling joy amidst the chaos, like someone who wants like, yes, I want more of that, like good. It's a good want, right? And then to tune into the frequency of like, okay, there's a how, and there's some technical knowledge in there, but then there's also can I just attune to the frequency? What I love about your book is it's so friendly. It's so approachable. I remember back in the day, you probably do too. I don't know what your initial training was. Mine was Iyengar. I was at the Iyengar Yoga Institute for 2 years in their teacher training program from 1999 to 2001. That was my first foray into yoga teacher training. And it was like light on yoga, BKS Iyengar. It was, Yoga Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, there's a bunch of like the typical texts. Approachability fairly low.
Yes. Yes.
Contact high, fairly low. Like, again, like maybe because of cultural differences, maybe because I was pretty green. I was pretty full of cultural toxicity at the time, fighting a lot of inflammation and whatnot. But I think there's something particularly to reading and listening, whether it's like the audible version or just like sitting with a Kindle or the book, where you're experiencing the frequency of a transmission, and then that can tune you into that frequency within yourself.
I think it's really interesting that you're pointing this out, because it ties into a bigger theme that I think it could be interesting for us to talk about here, which is that people think they need to go to India. They think they need to go to Bali. They think they need to be on the eco luxury retreat for there to be these profound insights or these profound moments. And again, I'm not saying don't do those things. Do those things. But what I am saying is that those things are not a prerequisite to you having the awakening you want to have, to having the insights you want to have. Reading a book is such an accessible way to be in a teacher's frequency without having to fly or move across the country or anything like that. And a lot of what I'm also trying to dismantle in the book, and why I'm glad you say it feels approachable, and I've heard that a lot, is because I felt like I had been fed so many lies about what meditation needed to look like, or how spirituality was going to happen. Instead, what I found is like some of my most spiritual moments have been doing yoga in my pajamas, not at sunrise with like vomit on my pajamas from something that happened with my kids earlier. Like, it's not glamorous. I talk about an anecdote in the book where I had this crazy heart chakra opening, like looking at a tampon wrapper in a bathroom stall at the time. Like the potential for transformation is everywhere. And I've actually found the more I just integrate yoga into everything and integrate yoga habits, which we can talk a little bit about that are in the book, what all the prerequisites that I thought I needed, right? I need to be wearing white. I need to be up at dawn. I need to be doing specific chants in a specific order. I need to have my, headband on. Like, all of that is, again, lovely, but it's actually not required. Some of my most profound moments have been just extremely messy and chaotic. So it's not just like, you can find this joy and this bliss within the chaos. It really is available to you. And sometimes I feel like it's actually more available to you in those moments. So I have a bunch of yoga habits that I sprinkle throughout the book, because I say I'm a realist. Even though I've given you this 20-minute routine that we've designed together with the quizzes, that's modular, expand, contract it, do whatever you want with it to adjust to your day in front of you, I know there's going to be days you won't make it to the mat. There just will be days you won't make it to the mat. And, me 10 years ago would never say that publicly. And now I'm just like, yeah, there are days like that. That just happens sometimes. And then what do we do? And so that's where I created the yoga habits, which are basically little ideas, pieces of Vedic wisdom that you can sprinkle throughout your whole day. So some are more psychological, things you can think and say to yourself that embody some of the key principles from yogic philosophy. Some are practical, just like, do a half sun salute or a little side bend while you wait for the kettle to boil for tea. I give an example in the book of, how I live my life right now is like my husband will be shaving in our bathroom. I have yoga mats in every room in my house. I'll just whip out my yoga mat on the bathroom floor, do some cat-cow, and we'll talk about weekend plans. Now, is that the only practice I'm going to do that day? Hopefully not. But it's just like, I'm just slipping this in all the time. I call this yoga in between. You can do some deep breaths at stoplights. I love meditating in my garage. There's so many examples of ways that instead of tuning out, instead of doom scrolling on our phone, we can take care of our bodies, reconnect with our breath. And so a lot of fun and humorous examples of how to do this are sprinkled throughout the book.
And I just find too, it's funny right now, my some of the kicks that I'm on are running backwards, walking backwards, and just jumping up and down a lot. And it's hilarious, because my family just totally expects me to be me now. So there's not this mom's being weird. It's just that's just her. That's just her. She just does things different. So now I'm walking backwards almost everywhere I walk, which is quite a practice. But this whole idea of the practice being something holy and sacred. And yeah, I was on my yoga mat an hour and a half before dawn this morning, doing something that looked a little bit more like a practice. But to me, there's no difference between walking backwards, going out to get tacos yesterday with Indy and sitting in what looks like a yoga pose in quiet before the dawn. And I think this level of integration is really that key of joy. And I want to kind of return to this concept of joy of it's always been joy amidst the chaos. There's always been this, even the experience that we have a choice in what it is that we're doing. And the more we're uncomfortable inside our body, it means that what we're doing isn't working. So when I look at what's really maybe some of my new definition of what yoga is it's whatever the things are that help me be increasingly comfortable and capable within my physiology, including my cognitive capacity, it's in my relational capacity and my bliss capacity, in my capacity to be capable and effective in my Dharma. Right. It's the yoga is whatever lets me do all that. And I feel that's what you're getting people into is it's whatever you think it is or looks like that's a good start.
Yes, it's a good start, but there's probably more. Yeah, no, I love what you're sharing about the tacos and the walking backwards. And that's why I called the book Yoga Life, because I originally wanted to call it Your Life as a Yoga Studio, but it was too long. But that's the idea, right? Your life is a yoga studio. And I love the definitions you were just sharing around yoga. And the one that I use in the book, which kind of says the same thing, again, just less words, is yoga is awareness. Yoga is awareness. So any awareness that you have of a pattern, a relational pattern, the fact that you're breathing very shallow or very deep, or awareness of your breath, or awareness of your negative inner dialogue, or any yoga is that space between the breaths that gives us a heightened awareness of who we are, witness consciousness, essentially. And so I give the example, which is a little cheeky, but I say, if you're doing a super duper back bend or the splits or something, but not breathing and don't have any awareness, you're in competitive stretching or competitive back bending mode and you're pushing yourself, that's not yoga to me. You might be in a shape that looks like a yoga pose.
Yeah.
But if you're not,
you remember the magazines
with
wait. Do you remember the magazines when yoga started getting popular? And then all of a sudden in whatever fashion magazines, they'd have people in postures or in meditation. But anyone who knew the practice was that's a model who's no fucking idea what they're doing.
Yes. Yes.
It's that.
Yeah. What makes it yoga is the awareness, the breath. And the breath chapter is the longest chapter in the book because we can't have awareness without the breath. These two things are so interlinked. So that was the hardest chapter to write, and it is the longest. And that's why I say the soulmate postures are the ones that usher you into your deepest, fullest breath the fastest and most efficiently, and incorporate essential spinal movements and a couple other things. But ultimately, for me, it's like breath trumps poses, which again is very controversial, but I find like the poses benefit me in that they get me breathing more deeply.
Yeah.
If I breathe more deeply, then I have more awareness. So that is a very important piece of like re-education that I know will startle some people, but I think it's really important to put this reframe out there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So when you look at, I mean, one of the things that I'm increasingly noticing, and some of this comes from a teacher I studied with maybe a decade ago, Craig Hamilton, with Integral Enlightenment. And he's saying like one of the only ways he's found that you can measure the progress of your practice is through other people noticing. I love that. I love that. So one of the things that I notice in myself, and I'm not sure if other people notice it or not, but I'll check in and find out, is that like I'm not defensive. Like I used to be really defensive. Like, so if someone was critical of like whatever it was, however I would take their feedback would be in a protective mechanism. There was something to protect, right? So my ego had something to protect. And what I'm increasingly aware of, and I'll try, although my team has told me this, my team actually has given me feedback that I'm like way less, that this has shifted. But I'm going to check in with some family members. But what I notice is that I don't have the reflex, like the reflex to protect is leaving. Like first it was like a conscious choice of like, okay, I'm reacting and resisting reality, right? And then what I notice now is I'll get feedback, negative feedback on something, and I'll get curious. Like, and it's like instantaneous, like it's really fast now. But I'm 50 and I've been on this path for a few decades, but it's like, oh my gosh, like that's a cool way to go into the second half.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that.
What have you noticed in this channeling joy amidst the chaos with raising kids? I mean, you have a business that's like very demanding of you in the world, and you have a lot of ambition and a lot of Dharma. So what are you noticing? If you're like, what is like the cream of the practice created, and how is it? Because if I look at how that then affects my relationships, it really affects the people at work. If I'm not, they can give a lot of feedback and they can adjust the strategy of the company, and they know I won't be defensive. That's an interesting move for me. That's new. With my kid, she's now not being modeled a way of resisting feedback. And she's actually, because I've been working on this for like about a decade, she's pretty amazing at receiving feedback, like just like way better than I was, a year ago, way better than I, as a kid, like no way. So what are you noticing in your kids, or what are you noticing in you in terms of like this evolutionary current that it moves through us, it awakens us, but it really touches the lives of those around us?
What a deep question. I love you sharing on this and the example of the defensiveness, because I think, so many of us just didn't feel safe when we were young, or we felt like we had to, react or stand up to ourselves. And it's just so ingrained, and to be able to soften that, I mean, that's just so beautiful and really inspiring. I think something that I've been noticing is just more courage to trust in myself and invest in myself. I think I always ran my business for years in a little bit of a panic, like, when is it going to go away? Right? Like, when are all the students going to go away? When is the search engine ranking going to go away? When is that? Right. And it's this very toxic energy of fear that it'll all be taken away, and that I wasn't deserving or worthy of any of it in the first place. And I think that's a message we're really fed as women as well, right? Like, don't shine too bright, like keep your head down, like don't stand out too much. There's just so much in our culture around all of this, right? But something I have been relaxing into more in this season and finding joy in is just like, this business is so big now, like it's not going to disappear overnight. Some of the things that are like the worst thing that could ever happen, certain staff members leaving, losing my Google ranking at one point. Like during 2020, I used to be the only online yoga teacher training. Now I'm like one of thousands, right? Like that's kind of the worst thing that could ever happen. I mean, it was great at the beginning because I was the only one there when everyone was looking for it because I was so early to market. But so kind of living in like, you know what, all of that happened and I survived. I'm still here. We still have a robust student base. We still have a beautiful business. And that belief in just that it's okay to relax into myself and share the way I want to share. I mean, even writing this book was very challenging for me because I go against the grain and say like, you know what, I'm mixing Kundalini with Hatha Vinyasa and I'm like not ashamed. Like this speaking up for things that, you know, because we want to respect tradition so much and I want to respect tradition so much. But here's the thing, Cate, and all the research I've done on yoga, it's not a static thing that we can just revere. It has been evolving with the times. It's been evolving since the beginning, right? It had a huge repositioning, pivot, rebranding around the Industrial Revolution, like we talked about, where all of a sudden yoga was something that was good for the body. Like Krishnamacharya completely rehauled it and repositioned it to be for everyone as opposed to just those priest boys and elderly people. It took a huge pivot again when it came west. And I think the yoga we need now is a tech-driven society that's extremely addicted to our phones. We have forward head, we have shorter attention spans. Like it needs to evolve. Like to me, this is necessary. I'm not trying to desecrate ancient wisdom. I'm actually trying to honor it and make it work for more people so we can move forward in the time we're living in. So I don't know, that was sort of a roundabout way, but I think it's really trusting myself more in that what I've created is real. I don't have to be afraid and that it's safe for me to invest in myself, even if it feels frivolous. For example, I put out some chanting music. I don't know if we've talked about this, but earlier in this year, I started designing my own original music and chanting on my own original soundtracks for my yoga videos just because I wanted to. Like there was no line item that was like, this will be a good idea, right? Like there was no, I was just like, I want a higher quality product. I'm sick of all the stock music. Like I've been doing this like you, like I've been doing this 10, 15 years. Like I've used every stock track that I can license for yoga and meditation. And like me and my editor are done. Like we're just done. I was doing a lot with like intuitive movement and kriyas, and I wanted the music to change as the movements change. I was like, I want these classes to be scored, right? You know, like the way you'd score a movie. And years ago, I never would have been like, okay, I'm going to invest thousands of dollars into this. And this year I did. And it brought me so much joy, like listening to those songs, hearing them. I'm getting to play them when I teach live. Like it so lights me up. And, that's just one example of, there was no logical reason, but I'm trusting something deeper, that there was a reason that that music had to come through me, and that, I don't know if it's like profit necessarily that's going to come, but I know something's going to come, right? Because I'm in this creation with the divine and I really listen to my natural instincts to want to create this.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're ending here because it's, to me, it's really what the source of joy on the sva level, on the self level, is connected completely to Dharma.
And I would say to your authenticity,
Dharma, yeah,
right? To honor
Dharma has to be. It has to be authentic.
It has to be authentic, and most of us are not.
Well, yeah. Well, we don't know. We have no way to.
We have no idea. Like we didn't get a manual.
Yeah, and what you were speaking to earlier, the living teaching. I mean, the word for that is Ayurvidya, right? So the Ayu is life, and Vidya is the living wisdom. So Ayu, life, living, and then the Vidya, as opposed to like Veda. Veda is the recorded wisdom. The Vidya is the living wisdom. And so any of us who are, in this process or have been in this process for a while of like awakening, right? Of seeking, of being propelled to something higher, right? And I love that about Uplifted, that you have that there's a lift, there's a directionality to the evolutionary spiral, and it goes bigger and brighter. It goes beyond, right? That there's this lift. And when we're truly living in that current, in the sva dharma level, like on the self dharma level, it doesn't look like what other people have done yet, right? And there's this, that's why the studying Ayurveda for 20 years brought me to primal habits. It's like, I didn't want it. It wasn't like the music, like your life. If it was out there, I would have been like, sweet, someone else did that, but It wasn't out there. And it was your calling into it. And I think for those of you who are really resonating with why the self-study, why the home practice, like why Brett wrote this book on yoga life, on the habits and the poses and the breath works, the channel joy amidst the chaos, like this idea of you can only find it inside you. And so if you're always doing yoga with other people or you're always watching a video, it's like, it's time to turn it off and go in and find what Brett's talking about in terms of your soulmate poses and the permission slip to do it your way and to go home to yourself, like, and to where that's going, because it's on an evolutionary trajectory and you're supposed to do something here. Like, you're really supposed to do something here with your life.
So beautifully put. Yeah. I the only thing I would add is, the thing we're awakening to, which I just see so many of us put out there as this like otherworldly thing. It's like your authenticity. You're awakening to your own authenticity, like the divine being in love within you as to why you were created here. Right. So thank you so much for having me. I've just absolutely loved our conversation. Thank you for your support of the book. And I look forward to reading your next book as well. So love that we can have these dialogues.
Me too, Brett. Thank you.